Well, let's talk now to Jamie Shea, former NATO Deputy Assistant Secretary-General and now Senior Fellow at the Friends of Europe think tank. Jamie, welcome back. Good to see you. Let's just take stock amidst claim and counter-claim. Where are we currently, would you say, in this conflict?
Oh, well, good afternoon, Jamie, and thanks for having me back on. Obviously, not easy times for Ukraine. No sense in hiding this. As you just pointed out in your introduction, the Russians are advancing, not spectacularly, 100 meters, 200 meters a day, and a great cost to them in terms of loss of life and material, but they show no signs of being ready to give up. And, of course, those 100, 200 meters a day eventually turn into kilometers and tens of kilometers and significant advances. The other worry, I think, for Ukraine is that the Russians are now on the threshold of capturing some significant towns, coal mining, minerals, coal and steel, transport hubs, significant towns in the Donbass area. And that also would open up the possibility of pushing their advance further into Ukraine. You've mentioned, of course, the North Koreans entering the conflict. Too early to say how numerous they're going to be and how effective. And also Russia has stepped up massively its attacks on Ukraine's energy grid and infrastructure to try to obviously drive more Ukrainians into fleeing the country over the difficult winter months. So difficult for the Ukrainians, of course, to stave off the Russian advance. Putin, despite the losses, shows every sign of doubling down and believing in his victory. So we're at a fairly somber and maybe decisive point in this overall conflict.
Well, that said, European foreign ministers hold talks next week. What might we expect to come out of that?
Well, if you're looking for an optimal scenario, Jamie, from a Ukrainian perspective, you're clearly hoping that they will show resolve. I mean, we've seen in the last week Putin going into a propaganda overdrive in an attempt to really intimidate the West to stop supporting Ukraine. You obviously, your viewers will have obviously heard of the new Russian nuclear doctrine, which loosens the conditions for the use of nuclear weapons. So Putin has been brandishing the nuclear option once more. Of course, that spectacular firing of a Russian intermediate range ballistic missile against Dnipro, and Putin's threat that he has lots of more of these terror weapons to use against Ukraine as well. And Putin's threats that, you know, if the US and France and the UK continue to allow Ukraine to use their long-range weapons against targets in Russia, he may even strike out against them and a NATO country. I think this is all done for the information battle, if you like, the battle of intimidation, the battle of the hearts and minds. But against this background, yes, I think for the meeting of the European foreign ministers, what Ukraine will want to see is, number one, resolve. We're not being intimidated. We're not going to be browbeaten. We've heard these threats before. It's not going to stop us helping Ukraine. I think that first and foremost will be crystal clear. Number two, that it's obvious that we have to do more in Europe to help Ukraine with its air defences to try to intercept and shoot down these ballistic missiles. It can be done, and even in the past, Russian hypersonic missiles have been shot down by Patriot and other Western air defence systems, despite what Putin says about their invincibility. I think, obviously, how we can get Ukraine through a difficult winter in terms of energy, for instance, and emergency civilian aid. Can we tighten the screws on Russia further? Lots of sanctions already, but the fact that, Jamie, the US have put sanctions on the Russian Gazprom bank last week, even 2.5 years into the war, shows that there's still quite a few areas, particularly when it comes to LNG gas, for example, gold, nuclear materials, where those screws can be tightened. But I think above all, with the Trump administration soon to come into office in Washington, one of the key debating points is how far are we Europeans willing and able to keep supplying Ukraine and help Ukraine to defend itself, even if the American assistance, which has been so vital up to now, suddenly comes to an end.
Jamie, good to see you. Thanks so much for coming back on the programme. Jamie Shea, the former NATO Deputy Assistant Secretary-General and Senior Fellow of the Friends of Europe think tank.
Thank you.